Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live on this Thursday, February 16th from Studio West. Yesterday, after the program, I caught up with Peter Thiel, legendary tech investor and Silicon Valley titan, to have a wide-ranging discussion about China, about AI, about Sam Bankman-Fried, and many other things. Let's get that conversation rolling so you can hear from Peter Thiel. Good morning, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show, special edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show and the Grand Old Pod. That man right there is Peter Thiel, legendary tech inventor, investor, and futurist. I really don't like the term futurist, but Peter is also the author of From Zero to One with Blake Masters. And I am particularly happy to have Peter here the day after I had a presentation on AI and Chat GPT from my colleague, Professor Mario Monero at Chapman Law School, warning the faculty that ChatGPT and AI generally is going to change legal education, immediately in things like take-home tests and paper requirements, but also profoundly in ways that the legal profession briefs and responds. So my first question, Peter, out of the box is just a general one. Am I wrong? And I hope you're my Tom Bombadil here and calm me down. Am I wrong to worry about the rise of the machines in the way that I'm worrying about that it's going to really disintermediate people with verbal and literal talent from everybody else because everyone's going to have the same set of machines and the same set of capabilities?
I think you're a little bit wrong to worry about it that much. It is probably somewhat overstated. Everything in Silicon Valley has been overstated for decades, where people have been, over predicting technology in one way or another. But at the same time, this is probably it's probably a big event. I think it's probably the biggest event in tech since maybe the launch of the iPhone back in 2008 or something like that. The media always overstates things. This is perhaps the one time they're not exaggerating too much, and so it's somehow we have to calibrate this correctly. It's a pretty big deal, even if you caveat that these things always they always get overstated. I think one of the things that's very strange about all the AI conversations is how they always get deranged very quickly. Is it going to replace human beings? Is it this weapon that's going to destroy the world? Is it what exactly does it mean? And I'm always struck by how quickly they go in a very strange deranged direction. So I think there's some kind of calibration where it's a very important, very transformative technology. It's probably going to be quite valuable as a business. It's valuable for Microsoft as a corporation. It knocked off $150 billion the market capitalization of Google. So it's a threat to the search engine for the first time in 20 years, to the Google monopoly. So there are business aspects that are important. There are things as a technology that are important, and then whether it's going to be a complete world revolution is probably something that's on a very different scale.
Now, Peter, I've got to explain for the audience. Tom Bombadil is a particularly unique character in Tolkien, and you and I are both Tolkien fans. You've probably read it double the number of times I have. But early in the book, Frodo and his couple of hobbits go off, and they're warned by Tom Bombadil, this ageless character who's sort of a god figure, but I'm not really sure who he is. He says, "You'll be fine. Don't go near the..." So he said, "Don't go near these mounds. Don't go into those, because if you do, you're going to be in trouble." And the first thing they, of course, is they end up doing exactly what they've been warned about. So you just gave a very nuanced answer. Don't do the wrong thing and we'll be fine. But there are 330 million Americans who can do whatever they want. There's Google, there's Microsoft. There are a lot of smart people who are not responsible. So if you take the worst actors and the best AI, what happens?
Well, I think I think I don't know if it's, again, we really always need to be careful not to overstate and exaggerate these kinds of things. But probably the worst actors are is something like the Chinese Communist Party, and
Yes.
what does China do with it? How does it how does it relate? How does it relate to the U.S.? How does it relate as a as a weapon system? The the piece that's dangerous um, AI is that it's both this powerful technology, but it represents sort of a centralizing version of tech. I've often said that if we say that crypto is libertarian, Bitcoin, these cryptocurrencies are a way to decentralize power, to decentralize money, and that they somehow have this libertarian vibe. Can we also then say that AI is communist? That it's a technology to centralize data, to monitor data, um, and that's sort of so that it's both powerful and potentially dangerous. And so it's always this very complicated thing about technology, where in some ways it's neutral. It's always a question how humans will use it. And at the same time, I want to argue that technologies can have a certain valence, where something like crypto can have a libertarian valence, and something like AI can have a communist valence, sort of a centralizing, controlling technology, and that's the element of it that I think is a little bit scary and dangerous.
Yeah.
There's
Earlier
certain,
this,
there's certain things where China's had it's had AI for a decade, and it's a country that's been deranged by technology. Everything is monitored at all times in all places, and I don't know. This is, again, you have to be careful not to exaggerate, but it's like the Cylons on Battlestar Galactica. They've been, you know, technology has overrun the country. It's in there's a sense in which Xi is this communist dictator, and there's a sense in which the computers have taken over the whole country. Everyone's monitored at all times in all places, and it's yeah it's not even it's strangely different from totalitarianism a la Stalin or a la Mao.
well, we are in an arms race with China on AI, and I this very morning spoke with Chairman Mike Gallagher, who's leading the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, about the balloon that lingered over our ballistic missile fields in Montana and elsewhere, and the threat that posed, and whether or not they're collecting the data that could be used to jam or destroy our ability to respond to a first strike. Am I wrong to worry about that and to jump to that? Because you don't send a balloon over those fields to take pictures that satellites could take. They're collecting something.
It is look, it is we are in a very we're in a very crazy dynamic with China. It's been probably
Stop it right there for a moment. I'll come back and we'll pick it up with that question. I'm going to spend most of the program talking to Peter Thiel today because you get very, very few interview opportunities to talk to Peter. He doesn't do them very often, and when he does, people lean in and they listen very closely, especially when he talks about Bitcoin and crypto, which we're going to do, and about China, which is coming. So stay tuned. ReliefFactor.com is going to get me through a long day today. And I am going to be a long day today because it's teaching day, and I'm still taking care of the ailing, fetching Mrs. Hewitt. But I've got my Icarian and curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. It's the only thing I take every day. I'm not taking any other product. I think I've had 100, 200 pitches to, hey, endorse this project, we'll pay you a lot of money. No, I don't want it. But I take ReliefFactor.com because it's 4 natural supplements that my doctor told me long ago I should be taking. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. And it works. $19.95 gets you started, 3 week starter pack. Don't wait another day. Join 500,000 people who do take it and get up, get going, get feeling great, stand on your feet all day long, prep for interviews, read books, do miles, walks, do some trundles, get out there and lift your weights, whatever it is. You won't be crippled by it. You got to stay. If you're going to see what happens with AI, you got to live a long time. Take relieffactor.com and help do that along with exercise and diet. Don't go anywhere. Peter Thiel continues after the break. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt live in Studio West this Thursday morning. Peter Thiel joined me yesterday after my program for a wide-ranging interview. We pick it up here.
Dynamic with China. It's probably been understated in strange ways for some time. But yes, I think that we have this rivalry with China that's has a military dimension, it's a technological dimension, it has economic dimensions, and it's been understated for quite some time.
Now, there's an interesting bipartisanship here, Peter Thiel. George Soros, of all people, has called Xi the most dangerous enemy to society. He did that a good bit ago. I think the recognition is dawning on people. Mike Pompeo told me at the Nixon Library last week, he's got dead eyes. And I mean, it's just an absolute menace. Do you think the country as a whole, the American society as a whole, understands what that new totalitarianism is and the guy who's running it?
No, I don't think that we are really up to speed on it. It is, it's sort of strangely, it's very different from the Soviet menace, which was only on a military dimension, and this one has, it has an economic dimension. It has this strange technological one where we always think of, we think of communism as somehow technologically backwards, not able to do things with tech. And this has both a tech and an econ dimension. So I think it's been strangely underestimated, and obviously there are ways the Republican Party has underestimated it. That if you think of Nixon or Reagan, they were anti-communist, but in the 70s and 80s, anti-communism meant anti-Soviet, and communist China was both an evil country and a U.S. ally in trying to beat the Soviet Union, and so there's a way that both Reagan and Nixon were good to be anti-communist, and then there's a way that they were not anti the CCP at all, and so that's somehow how we need to update from Nixon or Reagan. I mean, in 1972 when Nixon went to China. China had 1/5 of the GDP of the Soviet Union. So there was sort of a way in which, Moscow, the Soviet Union was the thing that Nixon was right to focus on, and same with Reagan. And today, China has 5-6 times the GDP of Russia. So, Putin's a bad guy, but Xi is a far bigger threat.
I see the world organizing, and like your comment on this, into two alliances. China with Russia and Iran backing them up are the new axis of evil. Iran's the shock troops. They'll do anything anywhere. Russia's the natural resources run by a dictator who's a paranoid. And China is a technological competitor of the first order. I don't know that we think in the world in those terms, or if that's too simplistic, but that's how I think of it. What do you make of that model?
I think that's roughly correct. It is, it's 4 times the U.S. population, and so there's a sense in which if China just converges with the U.S. technologically, they don't have to overtake us. If they're able to just copy the U.S., and if you can get to the same GDP per capita, if you can get to 1/4 of the GDP per capita, you have the same GDP in aggregate, and then you could, in theory, have same percent of GDP goes on military spending, and so you're a serious U.S. rival. So there are all these ways. It is at a scale that's very hard to calibrate, and then there are all these different ways that that I worry the U.S. has been is underestimated, is partially co-opted, things like this. It is.
Partially co-opted. Do you mean in terms of the capitalists who want to make money on the China market and will do whatever they can to do so?
Sure, it is. It is. There are ways in which Wall Street is co-opted. There are ways in which Hollywood is co-opted. There are ways in which the universities are co-opted. If you think of graduate schools in our liberal universities, probably 40-50% of the science students are Chinese, and you can think of it as it's a from the university point of view, it's a form of indentured quasi-slave labor in these graduate students, and so they get cheap grad students as slave labor, and then they don't question the way in which it's co-opted by China, or Hollywood gets to you know you never have movies in which the Chinese communists are villains. I think
They are never
the
villains.
last
Let's come back and pick it up there. They are never villains. Peter Thiel continues his conversation with me after the break. I'm Hugh Hewitt, watching breaking news, of course, always live in studio in the West Coast. Stay with us. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. I caught up with Peter Thiel yesterday, and when I do that, I take the opportunity to have a long conversation and share it with you. Let's return to that interview.
In which they were villains is 1997, 7 years in Tibet,
Wow.
or stuff like this. But when go back the last time the Chinese communists were villains. I think you have to go back something like a quarter of a century.
Peter, a couple of years
Smart
back,
villains,
a
or
couple of years ago,
yeah.
your friend Mark Zuckerberg invited a half dozen conservatives over to his house to have dinner. It was a smart idea. Listen to the other side, find out what we're thinking. But he was somewhat taken aback by my question: is Facebook? It was called Facebook at the time. That dates it. Is Facebook patriotic? And he was kind of stunned. He said, "Of course we are. We work with the Department of Defense." But I've been thinking since then, patriotic corporate America in the run up to World War II and throughout the Cold War, they didn't do anything to help the Soviet. They were aware of the Soviets. They did everything that could help us. I'm not sure Silicon Valley is patriotic in the way, say, Detroit was in the 40s and the 50s. Am I right?
I think I think Silicon Valley is not the most co-opted. So if you look at these, I think Hollywood is worse. I think Wall Street is worse. I think the universities are worse. Um, but yes, if you look at the big tech companies, probably the one that's problematic is Apple, where you have the iPhones are manufactured in China, and so if you think of and Apple is the biggest of the tech companies, and it is it's about a $2.5 trillion market cap, and somehow it is this it is it's very dominated by China. I don't think it's quite true of the other four big tech companies in economic terms. So if you think of Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, somewhat smaller. They don't actually get to sell stuff in China. They don't actually make money. Um, but yes, ideologically, they're very uncomfortable questioning it or challenging it. And there are no tech CEOs who are willing to really go on record as challenging the CCP, even though they're frozen out of China. They don't make money in China, so in some sense, they're not getting paid off in the way that Hollywood or Wall Street is, with again the big exception of Apple. But challenging it is something that they're very uncomfortable doing.
You have gone on the record. I think I want to get the quote right. You said about TikTok, it's an AI weapon that China has directed at the U.S. And you did that in a recent speech. Do your colleagues at the summit of Silicon Valley believe that TikTok is an AI weapon directed at China? Because I know you believe it and I believe it, and basically every Republican who's serious believes it. But do the Silicon Valley executives at the summit understand and believe it?
On some level, people understand that it's at least a serious business competitor. It's obviously getting people's attention. And so in that sense, it's a serious challenge for Facebook. It's a serious challenge for Google, for companies like that. So I think it's understood on that level. Um, and then are you? I don't know. It's not quite political correctness, but are you even able to talk about it as this weapon that's deranging us? That's quite a bit harder. One of the kinds of critiques that's been made of Facebook is that it has this deranging effect, that it somehow, and I think this is actually more of a left-wing critique of Facebook, but it sort of polarizes content. It somehow exaggerates the conservative content and deranges it. And I don't think that's true of Facebook. I'm more sympathetic to the conservative critique that it's actually shutting down content and sort of standardizing it, and that's sort of the opposite of polarization. But that kind of critique is probably one that could make of TikTok, that it is somehow it surfaces content to people that polarizes and deranges them, and in that sense, it's an AI weapon that's being targeted at our society.
The CCP is very aware of how we are reflexively defensive. And so, as soon as TikTok criticisms began to surface from you and other people who actually understand how it works, they began to call the critics of TikTok racist conspiracy theorists because they want to shut down the conversation because nobody in America wants to be called a racist or a conspiracy theorist. So the CCP's wolf diplomats immediately go out and call everyone who questions TikTok a racist conspiracy theorist. Did you notice that? Do you see what they're trying to do? They're trying to delegitimize the conversation about TikTok's danger.
Yes. Well, we need to figure out the right way to even talk about it. Where if you, we can't quite always just say China, because that immediately falls into the racist trap. But Hugh, I think saying CCP is in a way too mild, because that's
Okay,
like
interesting.
party, like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and it's not just a party, because it's this party state fusion that you're dealing with, and so we need something like, it's like Soviet Union. It's a communist party fused with a country, and so I think we should be calling it something like communist China, or maybe red China, which was a retro thing to say even for Nixon or Reagan. But I think red China gets at this party state fusion problem, and so if we
In a
call it
kind of
China,
retro way, I use the
used to,
term Chi-Coms because Chi-Coms used to be the term of art that one used to quickly get to the Chinese Communist Party but separate ethnic Chinese so you weren't getting into a racial thing. Just call them Chi-Coms to remind people the communists in China are our problem, not the Chinese people.
yes, exactly. It's something like that. It's some party state fusion thing, and then this is, look, the fact that we're even having this conversation is telling you something about you know how difficult this is on the U.S. side, where you know even labeling the enemy is hard to do, because we immediately have to be careful that we don't get accused of racism or something like that.
Gallagher is a pretty smart guy, and I enjoy talking to him, even though he's from Wisconsin. And he's running this, and the Democrats put their good people on the select committee. They're smart, like Ro Khanna and a couple other people that I know, and they're smart. Would you appear before the select committee to get? I mean, if they asked you to come, they're not going to subpoena you, but if they asked you to come, would you go and testify to it?
I think I would. And But it is it's again, it's a multidimensional problem. I think it is vitally important for us to think about it in the right way. But it is, yeah, as we said, it's this multi-dimension thing. And I think one of the things that's a challenge for both parties is the way in which we are co-opted in different ways. And the Democrats are, I think, co-opted by Hollywood, by the universities. The Republicans are, to some extent, co-opted by all these businesses that are making money on a quarterly earnings cycle, and where you're not supposed to be rude and question China too much. And the Republican risk is that we become like the Kuomintang, the sort of nominally center right party in Taiwan, that at this point is just this weirdly pro China party and doesn't question China, and has somehow been co-opted. And so I think and I think this was where I think President Trump was good. And this is where a disturbingly large part of the Republican establishment, both Senate, House, elsewhere, is weirdly co-opted. So it's not a simply partisan thing, where I think there are things. I think Biden was, in some sense, like as close to the Manchurian candidate as we could get in 2020. If you looked at the people in the Democratic primary, it was Biden was the Manchurian candidate. And then the if Biden wasn't going to make it, Bloomberg was sort of the default Manchurian candidate. So they were the worst possible people for the U.S. from getting tough on China. I mean, even Elizabeth Warren. I mean, all these people I think are in some ways terrible. Were tougher on China than Biden.
If every minute of every Republican primary debate was devoted to China, I wouldn't be unhappy, Peter Thiel, because it is the overarching number one
Yes,
issue of our time. Are you
but
an optimist?
it's like Iowa. Iowa. If you look at the states in the U.S., Iowa is a state that has a lot of agricultural exports, and it is it is relatively co-opted by China. So how do you run an Iowa primary? And you can there's certain issues that Iowa skews to, but it skews dovish on China, and so there's a weird challenge with the caucuses in Iowa, and
I have not
then
thought about that. You're right.
on and on down the line.
Hold it right there. I want to do a market report because there's a lot more Peter Thiel coming up, but Birch Gold sponsors the program, and every day they want us to do a market report, and you want the market report because you want to know what happened to your money. Well, yesterday, gold stayed exactly where it was supposed to stay, $1,845 an ounce, the day where it was before. It only grows with inflation. It's factored in inflation, and it grows a little bit above inflation over like a century. So if you want your money to be there when you come to look for it when you retire, open an IRA, a 401k, a SEP IRA, any of the derivations. I think a Roth IRA as well. From Birch Gold. That's where I buy my gold from when I buy gold, or even buy physical gold from them as well, and just put it in your safety deposit box. You head to hughgold.com. Hughgold.com, or text my name, Hugh, to 989898. The Dow yesterday was up 38 points, the S&P up 11, and the NASDAQ up 110. That's generally because U.S. retail sales rebounded sharply in January. So some retailers are going to make some money. Amazon's going to make some money. Macy's is going to make some money. But it means that inflation at 6.4% isn't going anywhere soon. Biden has failed to tame inflation. Birch Gold is where you go to get physical precious metals to put in a third-party administered depository so it's legit with the IRS. Ask for the free information package at hughgold.com. Hughgold.com. More Peter Thiel on the other side. Stay tuned to this Thursday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Welcome back, America. Peter Thiel and I caught up yesterday. Here is part 4 of that interview. When we come to China, for the parents out there, Mitt Romney, when I first sat down to interview him, 2005 or 6, he asked me if I was a grandfather, and I wasn't yet. I am now. And the reason he said is because once you become a grandparent, your perspective changes completely. You go from worrying about the next 10 or 20 years to worrying about the next 50 to 75 years. And that has happened to me as I become a grandfather. Are you an optimist about the next 50 to 75 years, or are you in the camp of we're going to get beat and we're going to be part of the Middle Kingdom's? They're not going to invade anyone. Henry Kissinger told me they're never going to invade anyone. They're just going to dominate everyone. He didn't tell me the latter part. He just said they would never invade anyone. Are you an optimist or a pessimist about the next 50 to 75 years?
Well, I always think that both optimism and pessimism are somehow incorrect. They're too ideological, and they're both modes where you don't do enough, because extreme optimism means that you don't have to do anything. We're sort of on the winning side. Extreme pessimism is defeatist, and we're going to lose. So I always think of extreme optimism as a form of denial, extreme pessimism as a form of acceptance. And what we need to do is somewhere in between. We need to be fighting, and we need, and then I think, it's not, I don't think these things are written in the laws of history. They're up to humans. They're up to human agency. There's sort of choice. There's freedom in deciding what's going to happen. But I think the truth is somewhere in between. We're kind of evenly matched with China. We're kind of going to be evenly matched with them for a long time, and it's up to us what to do. It is true that China is growing faster than the U.S., and in some sense, if you look at it on a GDP basis, it's going to overtake the U.S. But it's not. I don't think it's true as a matter of a strategic map, because as China overtakes the U.S. in GDP, I think there's so many countries that are going to become scared of China and that will naturally ally against China. And so if you look at it versus 20 years ago, Japan was weirdly pro-China 20 years ago. It's anti-China. Australia has flipped. Vietnam has flipped. India, I don't think that's the best ally for us, but they've kind of flipped. So there sort of are, and I don't think China will overtake the whole world.
Why is India a bad ally for us? Because I'm kind of counting on India as our ace in the hole, because if AI requires people generating information, they've got as many people as China. So if they're on the right team, that helps us.
Man, it is. I'm tempted to say something like, with friends like that, who needs enemies? But they are. It is. It's a profoundly corrupt society. It is. It's probably. If you think of it as a place to do business, it's probably as bad or worse than China. I mean, I think there are ways U.S. companies can make money in China. It's even harder to do that in India. So it's deeply corrupt. There are ways in which there's some good things that came out of the British colonial period. It has some kind of democracy. It has some kind of rule of law, but it's also just the whole society is just steeped in anti-Western, anti-colonial resentment. So there are all these ways. India is a very, very messed up place. So I think I'd rather count on Japan, Australia, even Western Europe. There are all these other places we should, UK, France. These are the places we probably need to count on much more in having this anti-China coalition.
Peter Thiel,
Ukraine. Right. Yeah, you're right that it's in India's interest to be anti-China. They're sort of natural rivals, but we better count on other countries.
All right, stop it right there. When we come back to hour number 2, we'll continue the conversation with Peter Thiel. We're going to get into the media and what has happened to legacy media. We're going to get into Samuel Bankman-Fried. We're going to talk about legalizing drugs. We're going to talk about the Republican Party and leader Mitch McConnell. There's lots more to talk about, so stay tuned. During the break, though, if you want, head over to HughHewitt.com. On there, you will find the transcript and the audio of Peter Thiel. You'll also find, by the way, the ad for the Hugh Cruise, or you can go to HughCruise.com. 7 Seas Voyager, best ship in the world. Guy Benson and I are going to be talking about all these issues, including the presidential race of 2024, beginning September 7th in London and ending in Monte Carlo 2 weeks later after stopping in France, Portugal, and Spain. Trip of a lifetime on the ship, the best ship to go anywhere on, with Guy Benson and me talking politics. Maybe talking about Peter Thiel. Come and join us. Go to HughCruise.com or simply go to HughHewitt.com and find the banner for the Hugh Cruise. I'll be right back with Peter Thiel in hour 2 of this Thursday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. On this Thursday, legendary investor Peter Thiel joins me for hours 1 and 2 in an in-depth, wide-ranging conversation, mostly about China, but also about artificial intelligence, Sam Bankman-Fried, and much more. Don't miss a minute of today's Hugh Hewitt Show.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Thursday, the 16th day of February in the year of our Lord 2023. Yesterday, after yesterday's live broadcast, I caught up with Peter Thiel, and I spent an hour plus talking to him, and I'm replaying that in this hour and last hour. So you have a chance to hear him at length as opposed to a snippet here or a snippet there. Let's get back to the conversation with Peter Thiel. Invasion by Russia of Ukraine mobilized a portion of Europe to the reality of the competition that exists for domination in Europe, and perhaps a little bit with China and Iran, because Iran is arming Russia to kill Ukrainians and threaten Eastern Europe. Do you think Europe is awake yet, Peter Thiel? You are originally a German, and people may not know that. And you're also a New Zealander, and you're also an American. And I just wonder about the Germans, whether they have reverted to their historic, and this is history talk and not Hugh Hewitt, they've tried to play both sides for as long as we've been writing history in Germany. Since the Frederick the Great or whoever put it together, they haven't really been a Western country. Do you have confidence in them?
Man, it is. I'm not a German citizen any longer, and there are certainly all these ways. It is. It's a deeply messed up country. It is. I think you had the Nord Stream pipeline with Germany and Russia, where it was all this sort of unhealthy, I don't think interdependence. I think the right word is codependence with China. We used appeasement in the 1930s, and 1970s was détente, and I think this we need a new word for the unhealthy relationship with China, and it's something like it's a codependent relationship. And just like the codependent relationship that Russia had with Germany, where this pipeline was this sort of unhealthy codependency, we have 100 pipelines between the U.S. and China, or between Western Europe and China, where things are sort of entangled in this codependent way. So I think it's it's very very messed up in that way. In the 1930s, Germany was the country that was the subject of appeasement, and now it has become the appeaser in chief. So there's some very very strange dimensions about the history, but it is it's in some ways you can think of Germany. It's all sort of dominated by these weird corporate interests. If you look at it on a partisan level, you think of a company like Volkswagen. The Social Democrats are, and it's a company that's deeply co-opted by China, because half their cars are now made in China, and they have to somehow appease the Chinese government. And the Social Democrats are the workers at Volkswagen, and the Christian Democrats are the management, and the Free Democrats are the shareholders. And probably the Green Party in Germany is the most anti-communist Chinese, and that's telling you something about how messed up the politics there are. That if you're
let's focus on how messed up our politics are. America was, until a generation ago, still living on the fumes of having been a frontier and farming country that was also powered by manual labor and was very resilient. So when we went off to war in World War I and World War II, we were sending people who had grown up under tough circumstances, the Great Depression or industrialization. Is America too soft generally to survive in this cutthroat international environment, Peter Thiel?
I don't think we're too soft. But I think it is. Look, I think it's a strange global problem. We have to find ways to work with all these other countries. But there are all these ways. I think we're kind of soft. I think there are ways. There are ways in which we're kind of old. We're not as willing to fight. So I think there are a lot of things that are messed up, but I wouldn't say we're way too soft.
Now, Peter, I myself pitched you on investing in Spanish language media because I'm concerned about the American politics being driven by an ill-informed mass electorate that is increasingly disconnected from reality. And I'm wondering, you are obviously concerned about American politics. You back candidates. You went to the RNC in 2016. You're concerned. What do we do about American media? It's fraught with dishonesty and simple incompetence and uncurious people who don't even read. What do we do about it?
Well, look, if I don't have answers to all these problems, and certainly, look, if you just look at the state of the mainstream media or things like this, you would be, completely pessimistic, and you say it's just completely hopeless. And the thing that's countervailing, or at least moderating that, is that it's been in such decline, and it just doesn't dominate the discourse in the way that it did 20, 25 years ago. So yes, it's very messed up. If it was up to the mainstream media, the country would be completely lost. But fortunately, it's still very powerful. Fortunately, it's not quite as omnipotent as we sometimes make it out to be. They skew things in a partisan way in this country. On the other hand, they hated Mr. Trump in a completely deranged way, and it was not enough to stop him from winning. So that was like it was a manifestation of just how weak the media is, that they couldn't stop Trump in 2016. And look, there's a way in which the derangement, it always backfires. People know that the media is biased, and they discount it appropriately. They know that
before I turn to American politics, I know what the leftist response will be to that exchange. They'll say, "Did you not see the Super Bowl shot that had Rupert Murdoch sitting next to Elon Musk in a box at the Super Bowl? Fox Network and Twitter are owned by center-right, perceived center-right people or conservative people, and I'm nuts for saying media." But in fact, journalists themselves, I mean, like 95% of them, are not merely liberal anymore. They're deranged. That's a word I think you probably use more than any other word. If we put this into the machine, you would use deranged. I think they're deranged about Republicans. They certainly are deranged about Donald Trump. Does that change anytime soon? Because the people who go into the business are just not that willing to be persuaded of facts that are contrary to their worldview.
I don't think it changes, but yeah. So I think if you look at things like, I don't know, the New York Times or CNN, they were biased in a liberal way already in the 1980s, and they're complete one-party state organs at this point. So they're much worse than they were 30 years ago, by any way you try to measure these things objectively. But they're also somewhat weaker, and they can't quite control the discourse because everybody understands that they're biased, and so they're constantly undermining themselves. It is just, I don't know, it's like teenage girls into cutting or something like this. It's just pathologically self-destructive. And so there is something about them that's, it's deranged, but it's also, we shouldn't exaggerate how powerful they are.
Now, CNN is trying to change. Let's stop right there. Actually, we're going to come back for the bit about media coming up. ReliefFactor.com. I took in the first hour. I remind you about this hour because they're a sponsor of this show, and I tell you about it every hour because some of you are leaving at different times. It's Thursday, maybe early on Thursday, you leave late on Thursday. I always remind people, don't leave home without it, for the very simple reason you want to be healthy, you want to feel good. Relief Factor has 4 natural supplements: icariin, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega in each pack. The full bag of Relief Factor that you get, the starter pack, 3 weeks worth, has packets. Each packet has those 4 pills. Those 4 pills are easy to swallow because they're beautifully produced. I mean, the engineering that went into this is just amazing, as are the natural supplements. So do me a favor, try it. $19.95. Become one of the 500,000 people who, like me, take ReliefFactor.com every single day. Head over to ReliefFactor.com. Get your starter pack today and come right back for more Peter Thiel as we talk about the media next on the Thursday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. Peter Thiel may be the most important center-right technologist on the planet. And so he joined me for a long conversation yesterday after the live broadcast ended. And I'm playing that for you now. Let's get into part 4 of that conversation.
They are.
Now, CNN is trying to change. Chris Licht is actually trying to change.
Chinese communist AI, and even that we shouldn't exaggerate. We shouldn't exaggerate that, and we shouldn't overstate CNN.
Well, if Chris Licht, the new leader of CNN, called up Peter Thiel and said, "What do I do to regain your credibility, to get you to watch again?" What would you tell him?
Well, look, it's I mean, there's sort of straightforward things you can do. There's some way in which you just you just cover both sides. You just let both sides talk. It's not the bias in media is not in how topics are presented. It's in what topics you even select. It's how certain things we don't cover. It's certain thing you probably if you talk about the question of whether the CCP is a problem for the U.S., just raising the question is almost an answer, and then we end up just not talking about certain types of questions, and so that's I think CNN, all these places would correct it if we just had a debate, if we just corrected it, just having the debate, our side will win.
Well, you're very right. There are some topics. I myself, I'm going to offer myself up as an example of self-censorship. I do not talk about gender fluidity on the radio because there are children in the car on the way to school, and I don't want to present the parent with a question that they don't want their third grader to ask them as they're getting out of the car as they're being dropped off at elementary school. So I self-censor the topics that I cover, and something as controversial as gender fluidity has gotten J.K. Rowling basically on a pit barbecue spin in the left-wing circles. So self-censorship is almost a necessary ingredient of survival with an audience, because people will turn you off if you make them uncomfortable. So I don't know how, and this is more of a comment than a question, I don't know how the media deals with some of these, given that people will turn them off if they start talking about it. And I think they might turn the channel if the CCP comes up because they don't want to worry about it.
Yes, but look, I think there are. Let me just push back a little bit on this, Hugh. I think there are all these debates about diversity, identity politics that are kind of crazy, but I wonder whether they are also distractions from, again, communist China. Let's just posit that every single one of these debates is a distraction from communist China. And so, we can have, I don't know, there are race problems in this country, and there is a debate we need to have about racism, and there's something we need to do about the history and overcome that. But if we only talk about that and talk about nothing else, that's somehow doing the CCP's bidding, and then I worry that this is, when I was an undergraduate at Stanford in the late '80s, and I was involved in all these campus wars, culture wars. I started a conservative student newspaper, the Stanford Review. I wrote an anti-political correctness book in the mid '90s, The Diversity Myth, and I think there was a way in which the conservatives were right about all the issues. And yet I worry that it was somehow the wrong thing to focus on, and that we were missing the elephant in the room, which I would say at this point is something like the Chinese communist goal to take over the world or something like that. And so if we're talking about identity politics. It's an endless, look, it's an endless maze. It's, the word identity means that which makes you identical, that which makes you the same, and that which makes you unique, that what makes you different. So identity means both same and different. And so when you start with a word that means A and not A, you can go in any crazy direction you want. And so it's an endless maze of derangement.
If I were king of the world, not queen, not duke, not earl, all I would do is talk about the Chinese Communist Party. I spent half of the show this morning that I'm talking to you with Deb Fisher on our strategic. Stop it right there. I want to finish in the next segment as we're close to the end of this. And I want you to hear the rest of Peter Thiel talking about Chinese Communist Party and everything else that is going on there. Consumers Research, by the way, consumersresearch.org, is a great sponsor of the show. And they follow a lot of the topics that Peter Thiel and I are talking about. ESG, DEI, the media bias towards ESG and DEI that distorts the debate about ESG and DEI. And so if you want to read what Consumers Research has to say about this, go to consumersresearch.org. Consumers Research has been around since the 20s. Peter Thiel and I were talking about the 20s and the 30s. Towards the end of this conversation, you'll hear Consumers Research got started then for the same reason it exists now, to provide ordinary people crucial, fact-based information. Head to consumersresearch.org right now and come back for more Peter Thiel. Welcome back, America. Peter Thiel and I spoke yesterday. Let's get back to that conversation. Weaponry. We're falling behind their ICBM production, their submarine production. I talked to Gallagher about the balloon. I would talk about it all the time because I agree with you profoundly. But most Americans, and I, this is not a left-right issue, they don't want to talk about it or think about it. Whereas China controls what their people talk about and think about all the time. So turning, because I don't want to abuse your time, to domestic politics. You played in the Republican politics generally for the last 10 years. Is the party producing candidates that are serious about the Chinese Communist Party? Jim Banks in Indiana is serious about the Chinese Communist Party. Mike Gallagher is serious about the Chi-Coms. Generally, is the Republican Party serious about it?
It's more serious than it was 10, 20 years ago, but I don't know, it's a very, very slow moving, I don't know, super tanker or something. It's just very slow to shift. And so yeah, we're getting more serious. I worry that it's just a very, very slow process. And you know, there are all these ways we can criticize President Trump for being, you know, not the best vehicle, but then, you know, the alternatives were sort of I don't know, you know, there's a lot that was wrong with Paul Ryan. He was never that critical of China, or if you think of Mitch McConnell as sort of the passive aggressive nihilism that is Mitch McConnell, that, you know, it's not good on China. So again, if you sort of evaluate some of the alternatives on the China question, they were always quite bad. And there are things that are good about McConnell, like, you know, he stops tax hikes, and that's, you know.
Oh, he got the Supreme Court. He saved the Constitution, Peter. You took con law at Stanford. He saved the Constitution by holding open the vacancy of Scalia. He got Trump elected by doing so. I always defend Mitch to Donald Trump when he's on the program, because, you know, you wouldn't have won if he had let the Scalia vacancy be filled by Merrick Garland, and we could kiss our First Amendment goodbye if the left got control of the court the way that they wanted to get control of the court.
Sure, but I would argue that the Supreme Court is still the least important branch of our government, and you know, it is, and then, you know, we need to be doing some legislation and some executive action in dealing with China, and that's where, you know, that's where McConnell's been quite weak, and that's where, you know, Paul Ryan was quite weak, you know, and that's where there still isn't really an alternative. You know, if you ask, yep, you know, what, you know, if you look at, I don't know, if you look at the 2022 midterm elections, where it was very disappointing how pathetically the Republicans did, and there's a lot of blame to go around. But I think, you know, I think my critique is we did not run on anything. We did not have, you know, we did not have a strong agenda, and you know, and basically, if the best argument you had was that you're, you know, you're stopping Biden judicial appointments, that's not enough to win. That's just a very,
you're right.
Run, you know,
particularly since we own the court now for 10 years. It's a conservative majority. That won't work anymore. Peter, I want to close.
Hugh, we don't own the court. It's just we have a majority on the court that is going to block activist liberalism. It's not activist conservatism. It's not going to overturn liberal laws. It's not going to overturn the New Deal. It's not going to be, you know, activist in a conservative way. So,
you know, I think you might be wrong there on the Fifth Amendment. If they simply revitalize the takings clause, it will revolutionize America. If they simply go back to no private property shall be taken without just compensation. And there are originalists who understand that, and that will radically change the American economy. But I don't want to go off on that rabbit hole. I want to go back to China.
The contracts clause would be
yes.
one but
Yes, the contracts clause. If they resurrect that, and by the way, the left doesn't even know that that's on the table, but it is. Who taught you con law, by the way, at Stanford?
it was the usual group of liberal law school professors, but you do, yeah. When the law schools were still relatively healthy because you have a certain kind of political debate in law that you don't have in most other academic fields because it's deeply connected to the society. So if you study, I don't know, political science or English as an undergraduate, it's somehow can be very decoupled from actual governance. But something like law school, you always have these debates at least.
Yeah, Peter, I've been talking to you longer than you stayed at Sullivan Cromwell, basically. And so I've been always wondering, I've never asked you, you spent 7 months or 8 months at Sullivan and Cromwell. I never went to big law because I managed to hide out in the government. Do you regret going to law school, looking back now? Because you're not lawyering at all. You just left as soon as you got the degree.
It's always a mistake, I think, to have regrets about things you did. There were a lot of things I learned in law school. I think it's very important on a lot of levels. It's certainly, I think there are a lot of questions why I did it. I didn't know what I was doing. It's always unclear what you are supposed to do. As an undergraduate, or what you're supposed to study. So there's sort of self critiques I can have of myself. I never had a midlife crisis, but I had a quarter life crisis in my mid 20s, and was trying to figure out what to do. And I think law school was somehow trying to figure out what to do with my life, and it was both. It both in some ways made sense, some ways it didn't.
All right. I got two last questions for you, Peter. The first one, I'm going to finish with crypto, but I want to talk to you about the most dangerous book that anyone ever read in America, which is The End of History by Francis Fukuyama. And I read it and I wanted to believe it, and he's a Straussian, and I did believe it, and he was 100% wrong. What do you read to stay ahead of the information curve on all of these CCP, CHICOM issues? Where do you get it from? Who do you listen to?
Man, it's surprising how few good books are written. Where I would sort of describe the Fukuyama book or things like that. We don't even have books that are wrong in the way the Fukuyama book's wrong, where it's like an interesting big picture view of where the world is going that's not complete orthodoxy. You have, I don't know, we have sort of these center left orthodoxy books. I don't know, it's Steven Pinker, Our Better Angels, where
Yes.
things are getting sort of less violent and everyone's becoming a liberal atheist, and this is sort of the way the society's gradually becoming better, and it's somehow completely wrong, but it's the complete conventional wisdom, and there's nothing on the other side like this. But yeah, I don't know. I just end up it's sort of just a lot of articles on the internet. It's I don't know. It's links people send to me in email. That's sort of what I end up reading. I find myself not reading probably enough books, but I don't actually know what I would read that's been written in the last 20 years as a book that really does a good
I
job.
don't know if you've read this yet. Pompeo's memoir, Never Give an Inch. It may be the best book on China I've read in 20 years, and not surprising because he gets it.
Yes.
Let me close. I originally started to set up this conversation after the crypto crisis of Sam Bankman-Fried. And I know that his father was a good professor of yours and he profoundly influenced you. I've read all that. I don't want to talk about Sam Bankman-Fried. I want to talk about the danger of crypto not being what you hoped it would be. And so I also don't want to move markets. The last time I heard you talk about crypto at the Nixon Library to Pompeo and Ambassador O'Brien, you moved markets. What is the deal for dummies like me about crypto? Is it still a thing, or is it just too dangerous to unleash on the world?
Well, I don't think it's too dangerous. It is, you know, in its original form. This we could probably have a whole hour long discussion on this. Things like Bitcoin, they were, crypto libertarian, cypherpunk, crypto anarchist, you know, anti-Fed, anti-fiat money kind of technology where, I always describe it as, in some sense, Bitcoin was a sort of technological version of gold, where gold is this anti-fiat money, hard money currency, and that's what was both powerful and potentially transformed about it. It was and then the question is, does it really work in that way? And you know when when people in the FBI tell me that they would like every all the criminals to use crypto because that way they can catch them, and I'm not making a pro criminal argument, but if if crypto is a way that the government can monitor everyone's payments and transactions, is it really this decentralizing technology as advertised, or is it actually a version of AI, a version of centralized control of the financial system, of the payment system, of things like this? So there was sort of a revolutionary, decentralizing promise of crypto, and then there are all these ways it hasn't quite been met. And then I think the strange thing about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and all of that
Pause it
is,
right there. Pause it right there. The strange thing about Sam Bankman-Fried. We'll come back and conclude the conversation with Peter Thiel. The transcript of it, I lightly edited it, is for readability, is over at hughhewitt.com if you want to go and read it. And if you just came in the middle of it and you just want to listen to it, it'll be on the podcast today. But stay tuned. Hugh Hewitt and Peter Thiel wrap it up after this.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by consumersresearch.org.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt live in Studio West on this Thursday. Here's the conclusion of my interview yesterday, taped with Peter Thiel.
It was this capitalist communist fusion product. The Sam Bankman-Fried narrative was, he was going to make $1 trillion, so it was uber capitalist, and then it was this effective altruism communist thing that was fused to it. And it's okay for me to make $1 trillion because I'm going to give all the money away to left-wing nonprofits. And the sort of social cultural question we need to ask about our society is not why was SBF a fraud, but why did you get away with this fraud? Why was it so desired by the media, by the regulators? And it's somehow this capitalist communist fusion product is what they wanted. And that's unfortunately what a lot of crypto turned into. It was not.
Peel that back. What do you think was the lure to the media? What was the vision? There's a utopianism there, and I think you're right, and I agree with you. But I want to hear you tell me what you think drew them in to the image of SBF sitting on a stage with Tony Blair and Bill Clinton in cargo shorts and fizzy hair, talking about making $1 trillion so we can give it away. What do you think attracted me? I always thought it was nuts.
I think I don't know. It's again a lot of different things, but I think some version of it is that if crypto worked on its own, it probably would be very non-egalitarian. Some people would make a lot more money than others, and I think the inequality was deranging, and then you needed a communist offset, and then somehow SBF was, it was this self-contradictory narrative. It's like this Hegelian A and not A. I am going to make $1 trillion and I'm going to give it all away, and it's logically self-contradictory, but psychologically, it's what they wanted to hear. And then the regulators and the media weren't very critical of SBF or FTX, and they were critical of, the crypto bros that were just in it to make money or something like that. And then the FTX was used to outflank everybody else. That was the SBF plan. It was, we're gonna do the fake left-wing stuff, and that's how we're gonna beat everybody else.
That is brilliant. Let's leave it there. That was brilliant. There's a couple of goodbye questions there, and you don't need to hear that. The entire audio and a lightly edited transcript is available at hughhewitt.com. I think Thiel is fascinating. I just genuinely think he is constantly one-handing it, the other-handing it. Something I teach my law students. On the one hand, on the other hand. I teach them to pass exams and bar exams that way. But I also think it's the necessary way to look at the world, is to understand both sides. And if it's multidimensional, all dimensions of an argument. We talk about legalizing drugs at the end. It's just a throwaway question because I had been talking about Skid Row with my law students that day, yesterday, and the despair and the deep dystopian reality of Los Angeles is the addiction level of tens of thousands of people who are wandering the streets. And I told them crime, if you go back a few years and read Del Wilbur's A Good Month for Murder, about 1 month in Prince George's County, Maryland. And Del Wilbur is the Washington bureau chief of the LA Times. He wrote this fascinating book. He investigated every murder in 1 month. I think it was February of 2019 in Prince George's County. They're all connected to drugs, all of them. And primarily to addicts who, they don't even intentionally kill people. They just kill people in the course of stealing their TV. An 80-year-old lady gets hit by an addict who's stealing her TV that is worth on the street $30 because it's an old TV, an old screen, and he kills her by mistake. But it's all related to what addicted people do in order to get their next hit. And the libertarian answer is Soma. And if you know what Soma is, I don't mean the real Soma. There's a drug called Soma out there, and someone told me about that. But Huxley didn't know about Soma, the real Soma, when he wrote Brave New World. When he wrote Brave New World, Soma was a drug that people took just to detach from reality and feel pretty good, sort of like concentrated endorphins. And I've long been wondering whether we ought to turn Big Pharma loose to come up with a way to unaddict people to the stuff that kills them and makes them violent, and then just give it away. Now, 75% or more of the society is not addicted, doesn't want to be addicted, never will be addicted. But I'm not sure I buy Peter Thiel's idea that we're going through the psychological crisis of 9/11 in 2008 and Afghanistan and the way that it's manifesting itself for America is an addiction. I don't know that. I think part of it's just physiological. But boy, Thiel's a brilliant guy. When we come back, I'm going to run down the news. I'm going to talk with Rick Scott, senator from Florida, about what's going on in his reelection campaign, what he thinks about Nikki Haley, much, much more coming right up. Jim Tallent's going to join me as well. So don't go anywhere, America. Stay tuned. Hour number 3 of the Hugh Hewitt Show from Studio West is straight ahead. Good morning, America. It's Hugh Hewitt coming up. The conclusion of my interview with Peter Thiel and the latest headlines as we round into the start of your day. Don't go anywhere. Well, I mean, you can go to HughHewitt.com if you want to listen to the entire Peter Thiel interview or read the transcript. But come here for the news and the analysis you must also have right here on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live in Studio West. Coming up, Senator Rick Scott, former Senator Jim Talent. Let me do the headlines first. U.S. retail sales rebounded sharply in January. That's not good news for inflation. Retailers are happy. Amazon is happy. But last month's 3% rise in spending, that means inflation isn't going anywhere soon. U.S. on track to add 19 trillion with a T in debt over the next 10 years. That's in the New York Times. We already have 31 trillion. That means 50 trillion in debt. All right, just assume it's 3%. 3% interest. And it's not. It's much more than that. Go figure how much interest we're not paying down the principal. We have to change direction. The CBO warns of possible default between July and September. All right, if it's really out there and it's July, look, it's February. You got to March, April, May, June. You got 4 months for Joe Biden to sit down with Kevin McCarthy and work something out. But the president isn't interested in that. Nikki Haley announces her run for the presidency yesterday. Let's go and hear part of that announcement, cut number 13.
We must stop socialism before it's too late. It's weakening America from within. But there's something else that's eating away at our national core. On Biden and Harris's watch, a self-loathing has swept our country. It's in the classroom, the boardroom, and the back rooms of government. Every day we're told America is flawed, rotten, and full of hate. Joe and Kamala even say America's racist. Nothing could be further from the truth. The American people know better. My immigrant parents know better. And take it from me, the first minority female governor in history, America is not a racist country.
So glad Nikki Haley said that. Ambassador Haley has got going for her the great ability to speak clearly on key issues. Yesterday, Nicola Sturgeon threw it in Scotland after 8 years. You know what blew her up? It wasn't Scottish independence. It wasn't being a left-winger generally. What blew her up was her idiotic proposals on gender fluidity. And the Scots took a look at that and they said, this is not our leader. And she went so far to the left, thinking that it's where the country was, that she went over the cliff. And Nikki Haley is saying, that's not us. That's not true. A little bit, by the way, my phone number is 1-800-520-1234. If you have any kind of a response to Peter Thiel, any kind of comment you want to make to the interview I conducted with Peter Thiel in hour 1 and 2, you can call me at 1-800-520-1234. Nikki Haley, let's go to cut number 15.
I have devoted my life to this fight, and I'm just getting started. For a strong America, for a proud America, I am running for president of the United States of America.
Well, now, the most controversial thing Nikki Haley said was cut number 14. So let's hear from Ambassador Haley on that.
In the America I see, the permanent politician will finally retire. We'll have term limits for Congress. And mandatory mental competency tests for politicians over 75 years old.
Mandatory competency tests for politicians over 75 years old. That's a thinly veiled shot. My advice to every Republican, I'm in Switzerland, as you know. I am not going to have a favorite in this race. I'm going to ask questions of them all. Ambassador Haley is welcome here every day, as is the former president, as is Mike Pompeo, as is Mike Pence, as is Tim Scott, as is anyone who's going to run for president, and there are a lot of them. All right, they're all welcome here, and I will ask them all pretty much the same question. I'm going to talk to them, as I did with Peter Thiel, about China and the media and how do we get the country going. What do we do about this drug addiction problem? If you look at the Peter Thiel interview, the transcript, and you review what I had to talk with about Peter, that's what I think every Republican candidate ought to be talking with. I need the phones are lighting up. I will get there eventually. But I do want to play for you Elon Musk yesterday, since it's Tech Titan Day. He gave a speech about why he bought Twitter. Cut number 20.
So I mean, to be frank, I was a little worried about the direction that and the effect of social media on the world, and especially Twitter. And I thought it was very important for there to be a maximally trusted sort of digital public square where people, within countries and internationally could communicate with, the least amount of censorship allowed by law. Obviously, that varies a lot by jurisdiction, but I think in general, social media companies should adhere to the laws of countries and not try to put a thumb on the scale beyond the laws of countries. I think this is something that is probably agreeable to the legislators and the people of most countries. So I think that's the general idea, is just to reflect the values of the people, as opposed to imposing the values of essentially San Francisco and Berkeley, which are somewhat of a niche ideology as compared to the rest of the world.
Something of a niche ideology. I think it is the wacky left-wing ideology of Silicon Valley that has so dominated Americans' elites. People in Washington, D.C. want nothing more than to leave their government jobs and go to work for enormous salaries for Silicon Valley. So they parrot the tech core at Silicon Valley. And when you get a dissenter like Peter Thiel and you get to talk to him about it, or Elon Musk, and I haven't interviewed Elon Musk, I'll try and figure that out. I do want to update you on the Russian offensive in Ukraine. Moscow's military capabilities are in question after a failed battle for Ukrainian city. And that's in the New York Times and the Washington Post. As Russians inch forward near Bakhmut, Ukrainians dig fallback defenses. It's a World War I war, and the Russians are not winning. And every day they don't win is a great day for the West. John in Michigan, 1-800-520-1234. What's on your mind, John?
My mind is that Nikki Haley wants to have tests, cognitivity test on people running for office. Joe Biden's going to have a physical today. Will his cognitivity test be released to the public so we can figure out what's going on with him?
I doubt it.
Well, it needs to be. That's all I have.
All right. John, I doubt it. There's going to be a physical today, and we're going to get a couple of paragraphs, and he's going to be fine. Because that which you would have, the conversation you would have if you had an aging parent with their general practitioner about how they're slowing down and they're forgetting a few things and they go in the wrong direction sometimes. Should they still be able to drive? That's the conversation. Should we take the keys away? And that's the conversation. Should we take the keys away from the president that the country's having quietly? And legacy media won't have it because they don't want to upset the president. Speaking of the president went to Lanham, Maryland yesterday, and it's just so crazy sometimes. Cut number 9.
Senator Scott's bottom line is, he said, we're reducing the deficit and at the same time we're getting seniors a fair price. Somehow that's costing the government. He's a little confused.
He's a little confused. I'm really not quite sure what this speech was about. Here is the whopper, though. Cut number 7.
We cut the debt by $1.7 billion in the last 2 years.
We did not cut the debt at all. The debt is different from the deficit. And I think what he meant to say is that the deficit is down by $1.7 trillion in the last 2 years. But that's misleading, too, because it's about not spending trillions of dollars on COVID relief. Everything the president says is fundamentally dishonest. And I don't know that he doesn't do anything except read what is told to him to read. And it's just so very, very, very dangerous. I want to play for you something. Well, I'm not going to. I'm going to do Andrew and Todd instead. Another attack on Clarence Thomas. It's like, rain comes in every few weeks in California, and that's what happens with attacks on Clarence Thomas. Justice Thomas is a great American. I'm reading a new book in draft about it. When I come back, andrewandtodd.com. They are terrific sponsors of this show. 888-888-1172. The 10-year went up to 3.8% yesterday, which means your interest rate for a 30-year fix is probably back above 6%. Do not wait around to buy a house or refinance a house if you need money, because it's not going to get better under Joe Biden. $19 trillion in new debt over the next 10 years. Interest rates are going up because Joe Biden has lost it. And people know it, and the markets know it. So if you're going to buy a house, do it today with andrewandtodd.com, getting you a pre-qualification letter. 888-888-1172. There was Sierra Pacific Mortgage, and you can trust andrewandtodd.com. 888-888-1172. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Annabelle is in California. 1-800-520-1234 connects you to the Hugh Hewitt Show if you have a comment on what Peter Thiel had to say or legacy media. Annabelle, good morning.
Good morning. Actually, I got up to take a drink of water, and I couldn't tear myself away from the interview with Mr. Thiel.
What do you think of him?
I think he's fascinating. I think he's brilliant. I liked your assessment that he kind of washes both sides, washes his kind of on the one hand kind of argument, which I think is effective. But I did have a question about something you said, which I'd love you to clarify. Would that be okay?
Oh, sure.
Okay. You were talking about the CNN, New York Times, et cetera.
Legacy media. Yeah.
Yeah, the legacy media. And maybe I'm mistaken, but Mr. Thiel was basically saying, look, you have to have a discussion. You have to put out subjects. Now, I understand when you said you don't talk about certain things in the morning, which makes sense, for instance, trans subjects, because kids are in the bus, and in the car, a little tired. And, you don't want to have parents be asked questions they may not be prepared to answer at a certain time, and that's reasonable. But to carry that over to, CNN doesn't want to talk about Communist China because it wearies the people watching, and it may not be good for ratings. I think it scared me because I sort of was understanding that you were forgiving the media for not bringing things. Certainly.
No, I don't. I'm sorry if I am misunderstood.
Okay.
The thing I wanted to convey is that an hour of television has got 5 segments. Mm-hmm. I have 12 in the course of 3 hours. Mm-hmm. So if I devote 6 segments of my time to Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping and the weaponization of and over the last 2 days, I spent a lot of time on the CCP and Xi with Peter Thiel, with Mike Gallagher, with Deb Fischer. Senator Scott's coming up after the break. That's okay for me because I can also throw in some lighthearted stuff. I can update you on domestic politics, play you some Nikki Haley clips. Uh-huh. If a producer of a 1-hour show devotes 30 minutes of their 38 minutes an hour broadcast time to China, people won't watch it.
Right.
And therefore, I understand the dilemma that producers have, but they should be covering the CCP every day to some extent. And occasionally, they need a 20-minute segment. And what Peter Thiel said, the most important thing, let both sides talk. All right, so that doesn't mean let the Chi-Coms talk. It means let someone thinks we're wasting too much money on defense come in and let them talk to Representative Gallagher. And if I were king of the forest, not queen, not duke, not earl, I would program network television completely differently when it came to the news because it's not doing its job.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I'm glad you cleared that up because I think that you have to cover certain things. You have to have a dialogue. We don't have dialogues anymore in the legacy media. It doesn't exist, and that's terrifying.
It doesn't. And hosts feel obliged to interrupt. I think what I get to do on the radio, and why the radio is always better than television, is that I have much more time, and I'm in control, and I don't have commercial breaks, and I don't have a need to create a viral moment to impress my bosses. Salem Media leaves me alone. In 23 years, they've never told me what to say, cover, do, or book. I got to cover my advertisers, but that's it. Hey, Annabelle, thank you. Speaking of people who support the program, myphdweightloss.com is a sponsor, and many of you have picked up the phone and called
864-644-1900
because at
864-644-1900
you'll be connected to someone like Rachel, who talked to Dwayne yesterday. Now, Generalissimo, you lost 50 pounds in the fall.
I did.
You have kept most of it off until Super Bowl weekend when you added a couple of pounds back.
Yes.
And typing Peter Thiel yesterday probably got rid of those pounds.
Yesterday was, I did lose about 1.5 pounds yesterday because there was not a lot of meal time in that day. There was not a lot of time for food.
Yesterday, not only did we do Peter Thiel after the live show, we also did 2 Hillsdale dialogues after the live show, and Generalissimo did the transcript of Peter Thiel. So he just basically walked in the door right now. He just showed up 1 minute ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
You see, I'm always correct. And myphdweightloss.com. What did Rachel say to you when you checked in with her yesterday?
You poor, poor man.
She did not.
No, she said I handled it exactly right, which is you don't let your brain, you don't let your mind get to the point where if you add a couple pounds, it's really not the end of the world, and you start justifying it. Once you get to a point in your mind, you say, okay, I've hit that outer limit. It's time to pull back, and you do the steps that you've already been taught.
And the Super Bowl bulge is universal, right?
Absolutely. Just about everybody in America put on a pound or two.
Yeah, it's just what you do with the Doritos are in front of you.
Of course.
Not at Team Hewitt, because the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt is down, and I'm doing the shopping. I am reduced to, a friend came over and saw the Orange Food Group on the counter and said, I see Hugh's been doing the shopping. And that's true, but that's also neither here nor there. I didn't eat it all at one time. Generalissimo, thank you. I want to get right. Senator Scott is calling, I think. And
I think that's who that probably was.
Yeah, Senator Rick Scott is calling. We're going to talk to him. I cannot get over this New York Times headline this morning. The U.S. on track to add $19 trillion to the national debt. Do you realize that we already have a $31 trillion debt? That means by the next 10 years, we're going to have a $50 trillion debt. Now, at 5%, that's $2.5 trillion a year in interest payment. We haven't got that kind of money. No one does. Stay tuned, America. Welcome back, America. Senator Rick Scott of Florida is running for re-election. He's going to run and win easily in Florida because he serves the people of Florida very well. But I want to talk to him about this headline story. Good morning, Senator Scott. Great to talk to you again.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I was better before I read the New York Times this morning. U.S. on track to add $19 trillion in new debt over 10 years. That, Senator Scott, will take us to $50 trillion in national debt. If the interest rate is 5%, that will be $2.5 trillion in a year in interest rate. What are we going to do?
Hugh, we got to do what I did in Florida. We've got to start looking at a budget, look at every line of the budget, and pick the things that are most important to us. That's what your family does. That's what you do. That's what everybody in this country does. Your government just hasn't been doing it. We've got $31.5 trillion worth of debt, and look at just the last 2 years. $1.8 trillion omnibus, $1.2 trillion so-called infrastructure, which wasn't, $280 billion anti-China bill, which was an anti-China. Just the spending is unbelievable. We've taken, just in 4 years, the expenditures of this country will go from 4.4 to over $6 trillion a year. I mean, this has got to end. I mean, like, if you care about the military, if you care about any of our safety nets, then you have to balance a budget. That's what we all do. We do it in our personal lives. I mean, if you want to be able to send your kid to college, you say, well, I got to save money.
This is just entitlement, Senator. If anything happens in the United States, as happened in Turkey and Syria, and by the way, it could. I mean, I live on a fault in California. There's a Mississippi River fault as well. There are faults off the coast of Oregon. We're not going to not do anything. We're going to print the money. So I think right now the best case scenario is $50 trillion in debt by 2034.
It's not going to happen. Hugh, I'm hell-bent on making sure that doesn't happen. I came here to change the direction of D.C. I came here to make sure we have real conversations about how we protect American citizens, how we protect Social Security, how we protect Medicare, how do we protect Medicaid, our military. And you only do it through fiscal responsibility. And it's going to happen. And by the way, Hugh, at some point, bondholders are going to say, I'm not going to buy American treasuries. I don't trust that they'll pay the interest expense. Because you have to rely on American taxpayers to want to they're going to keep paying for this. And eventually people are going to say, I don't trust American taxpayers that they're going to raise their taxes to pay for this. Look at what the taxes would have to go up to pay for this. We have got to get our spending in order.
Yeah, we've had 3 national crises in 20 years. 9/11 and the 2 wars that followed. We had the 2008 fiscal crisis, and then we had COVID. So the debt went crazy because we had deficit spending far more than we had, say, under Bill Clinton and early George W. Bush. The question is now entitlement reform, and that won't happen unless the president leads. Do you expect anything from Joe Biden on this?
No, he's being reckless right now. He's being completely reckless that he will not have any conversation about raising the debt ceiling. I mean, I am going to bust my butt to make sure that we do not raise the debt ceiling without getting a real structural change. So we preserve the things we care about. Get rid of the things that might be nice to have, but you can't afford it.
Yeah, the first step, I would think, would be to say defense spending and entitlements are sacrosanct. And let's start by cutting discretionary non-defense spending by 5 or 10% and the federal workforce that's not uniformed by 10%. Is that so hard to do? It's sort of a good faith thing.
No. You do it in business every day. In business, think about what you have to do in business. I ran manufacturing companies, all right? My buyers expected productivity gains every year. We had contracts where we had to reduce our price 2% every year. So when we spend all this money on technology, don't we get any productivity gains out of it? I mean, there's ways to do a better job with less money. We do it in business all the time. Businesses have to do it. You do it. We all do it every day. We look at how we spend our money. The reason we're at where we are is we don't even do budgets up here.
No, of course not.
The omnibus bill.
Senator Scott,
It was just
the biggest
people.
difference between the private sector, which I am and you used to be, is that I can dump any employee who isn't productive. Now, I've never had to do that because I only hire really good people, and we're very lean and mean. And Dwayne works 24/7, as does Adam and Jacob and Harley, and the people who staff this show, Danielle. They all work 24/7. It's very lean and mean. The question is, the federal government is anything but lean and mean, and you can't fire anybody. Could we start with maybe civil service reform to shrink the?
We have to. You can't. Everybody can't work for government, right? I mean, Hugh, we only have 132 million full-time workers in this country. Look at all the things, all the programs that we have. How do you pay for all those programs when out of 320 plus million people, we only have 132 million full-time workers? You can't.
No, you can't. Yeah, former Governor Pete Wilson used to say, when you had 10 people pulling the wagon and one person in the wagon, it worked. And then when 5 were in the front and 5 in the back, it became hard. And when you've got one person pulling 9, it's impossible. That's where we're headed.
Yeah. So look here, what I'm going to keep doing is I'm going to say, we can fix this because we can, but you do it by going line by line through budgets. I'm on the budget committee. For the last 4 years, we don't do budgets. We don't even try.
Yeah, that's astonishing.
As a taxpayer, you should be mad. Your money is being wasted. This omnibus bill that was passed, nobody read it. 3 times the size of the Bible. We got it 1:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. Okay, and then we had to vote on it within hours. Nobody knew what was in it. 7,500 earmarks. That's not the way you run a government. When I was governor of Florida, there were 4,000 lines of the budget. Every year, I went through every line. Every year, we had a written purpose for every line. If it didn't meet the purpose, if it didn't meet what it's supposed to do, I vetoed it.
But we don't have that constitutional authority. What we need is a president who will lead on this.
Congress should do it. Yeah, but Congress can do that. Congress can go through and say, this is the purpose. It's not meeting the purpose. We're not doing that anymore.
Who's the chairman of budget, though? Who is the chairman of your committee?
Well, it was Bernie Sanders. We haven't had a budget committee since.
Yeah, exactly. Bernie Sanders, if he was running the world, I don't think he even understands what this debt means. So, Senator Scott, let me move to politics while we have the chance. How does the Florida race look? How do people help you?
Well, the way to help me is there's always two, it's like donors and money. Donors and voters. And so, people get, you can go to rickscottforflorida.com and contribute. You can contribute, text America 22044, or what you can, what I really need is votes. Help me, tell people what I'm doing. You can sign up for our emails and get it out to people. And then you can, help in our campaigns.
rickscottforflorida.com. Has any Democrat declared against you yet? Because you're kind of unbeatable and Floridians know that.
No, I no, and I'm gonna work hard. I'm gonna continue to represent my state. I'm traveling every day. I'll be at a big rally tonight, 500 people in a small county, Gilchrist County, and I'm going to travel every day for the next 2 years. Make sure people in Florida know me. So they're going to know exactly what I run on.
Now, in terms of having the presidential campaign swirl around you, you said you're not running for president.
First time, right?
Yeah.
Hugh, this is my first race is that presidential year.
Is it a plus or a minus to run in a presidential year?
I think it's a minus. I think that if you look at 10, 14, 18, my 2 governor's races, Senate race, I was the top of the ticket. So yeah, we're going to be, all of us will be, subject to whatever our presidential candidate's doing.
What do you want in a nominee? I'm in Switzerland. I don't endorse and I don't favor one or the other. What do you want in a nominee?
I want competence. We've got problems. We need to elect somebody that says, you know what, I will roll up my sleeves. I'll work every day to solve the problems. That's what I want. That's what I did when I ran for governor. I said, I will work every day to solve the problems, and we did. So we need a competent person. We need somebody that's going to go in and say, I'm going to just sit down here. We're going to list out all the issues. I'm going to take everybody's ideas, and we're going to figure out how together we're going to solve these problems, because we all care about our great country. Let's all come together, solve the problems. How do we get inflation under control? How do we secure the border? How do we have a strong military? How do we have the right relationships around the world? How do we get our crime down? That's what I want. I want somebody that's going to be a competent person. I mean, it's like you're hiring somebody. It's real simple. I'm a business guy. When you hired a CEO, what'd you say? I want somebody that's going to make the trains run on time.
Senator Scott, last question. President Biden gave a speech yesterday. It's incoherent. And everybody likes Joe Biden, but I think he's infirm. I don't think he's incompetent in the mental sense. I think he's completely incompetent in management, but he's infirm. He's 80 years old. Does he not know? I mean, do the people around him not tell him that he is not communicating and he's not governing?
I don't think they can tell him. I think, in politics, a lot of people surround themselves with people that'll never tell them the truth. But look, there's a lot of 80-year-olds that are really healthy. He's just not one of them. I mean, he's just not a healthy person, and he's not a good communicator. He's always been wrong on the issues. But there's a lot of. I mean, I live in Florida. There's a lot of 80-year-olds that are very competent.
I know a lot of those. They're listening right now. That's not this. And boy,
you wouldn't hire him. Would you hire Joe Biden to run your company?
I wouldn't even interview him. Because I would respectfully interview the President of the United States, but I wouldn't want to make it a long one. Senator Rick Scott, thank you. RickScottForFlorida.com, RickScottForFlorida.com. Thank you, Senator. One of our great sponsors, ReliefFactor.com, is what I've got in my hand. I took it in the first hour, and I remind you every hour of every program 15 times a week. Why? I don't want you to leave home without it or your vitamin. Now, and whatever else your doctor prescribes for you. Don't ever stop taking what your doctor prescribes. I'm not a doctor, nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn. But I know, because I've talked to my doctors, Icarian and curcumin, resveratrol, and omega are 4 natural supplements. They're all in every single pack of the 4 pills of ReliefFactor.com that I take every morning in the first hour with this now completely stone-cold coffee. And it is absolutely the difference maker in making you able to move, walk, run, in my case, stand for 3.5 hours teaching today. But ReliefFactor.com works because it is it's a proven blend of natural supplements, nothing artificial, nothing that is ginned up in a lab somewhere to make you peppy or anything like that. It's just what nature gives you to assist your anti-inflammatory system. ReliefFactor.com. Senator Jim Talent is next, America. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
I worry that there are some members of Congress who are rooting for conflict and war with China. We've always had hawks and warmongers in Washington that think the United States is better off if we're perpetually in conflict. Obviously, what happened is absolutely unacceptable, and there were repercussions. The visit by Secretary of State Blinken was canceled. But I also want to make sure that we don't sort of slip into conflict with China, a country with which we have $6 trillion worth of trade every year. So we need to continue to pursue a policy in which we are competing with China as an adversary. But we aren't making mistakes just because of something that shows up in the headlines. We have to have a thoughtful policy of managed competition with China. I think China is very embarrassed by this incident. I think there's evidence.
Just stop right there. Welcome back, America. That is Senator Chris Murphy. There are senators who are rooting for conflict with China. I asked former Senator Jim Talent, who joins me now, what do you make of that, Senator Talent?
It's the classic line, that those of us who believe the way to prevent war is to be strong, to strengthen deterrence, are actually warmongers, when it's actually weakness, of course, that encourages the aggressor to aggress. It's our ability to impose sufficient costs and consequences on aggressive powers that deters conflict, right? So the problem, and the reason we're moving towards war in Indo-PACOM, is that the Chinese are the dominant military power, certainly within the first island chain, and are therefore encouraged to believe that they can attack, for example, in Taiwan and achieve their objectives. So it's exactly the opposite of what he's saying.
Yeah, Senator Murphy is a perfect example of what Peter Thiel and I spent 2 hours talking about, people who are co-opted. And I immediately thought Greenwich, Connecticut has got a lot of financial interests that are tied up with China. And that Senator Murphy, who's been a guest on this show, he's a nice enough guy, but he is clueless or deeply compromised. And I don't mean in an intelligence way. I just mean he doesn't want to upset the Chinese.
Yeah, look, the language he used was incendiary. It's not unusual to hear that from people who don't want to build up our defenses. So he shouldn't have done that. I think he's, generally speaking, given his ideological point of view, with which I do not agree at all, a pretty good senator. But that kind of comment is not representative of where the vast majority of the Congress is coming from. As you know, the Democratic Congress last year added $40 billion to Joe Biden's defense request. And we're going to continue to see a strong bipartisan majority wanting to be strong and have policies that'll deter China.
Yeah, I would love for you to go and read the transcript. I edited it for readability with Peter Thiel. He really gets China. And he is very aware that India isn't the greatest ally. Germany is completely co-opted. And that the world is on a holiday from history is what we're on collectively when it comes to Xi and the CCP.
I think we were on that holiday from history, from the end of the Cold War roughly through the middle part of the teens. And I think this is one of Donald Trump's big achievements, as he dragged our foreign policy into the 21st century, in particular, where China was concerned. And so if you look at national security strategies before then, although Obama had begun the rebalance to Asia, the roots of Trump's policies were in Obama's policies in the second term. You got to be fair. But we weren't even mentioning China really to any degree at all in our national security strategies until Trump took over. And then his people very quickly came around, and he very quickly began building a national security architecture that we need to deal with China going forward. So it's a messy process. But I'm overall, if we were doing what Mike Gallagher has said we need to do to strengthen short-term deterrence in Indo-PACOM, I would be pretty pleased with how Washington has responded in the last 5 or 6 years to the Chinese threat.
But Senator, I want to give you a chance. The New York Times says we're going to add $19 trillion in debt over 10 years. I just talked to Rick Scott about that. That means $50 trillion in debt, which means at 5%, $2.5 trillion in interest payments every year. I don't know how we maintain peace through strength when we have got a debt of $50 trillion.
Yeah, well, one way we don't maintain it, is by blaming it or cutting the defense budget or restricting what we're going to do on defense, okay? There's so many reasons for that. We do not have that deficit because of what we've done with the Department of Defense. I have a very grave concern that these deficit talks are going to result in restrictions on discretionary spending, okay, half of which is the Department of Defense, that as soon as the Democrats get full control again, they'll blow the lids off the non-defense discretionary spending, and all we'll be left with is more restrictions on defense. You want to hurt the economy and blow the debt up even higher? Let's get a war in Asia, okay? So, I mean, we have to have peace in order to be able to dig our way out of this debt. It's absolutely counterproductive to suppress the defense of the country in the name of economy. It'll end up.
Do you remember the Moynihan Commission? Can we do anything like that right now?
We've done commissions. I mean, we know what we need to do. The other thing about it's so ironic, is the things we need to do to strengthen short-term deterrence in Indo-PACOM are not that expensive. I mean, Gallagher can. That's right. It's longer-range cruise missiles. It's hardening the bases in Guam. It's stockpiling munitions. I mean, I'd love to have 10 more.
Senator Talent, thank you. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Adam and Jacob and Dwayne. I'll be back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.